The humidity in the Hollywood Hills was stifling, but it was nothing compared to the icy atmosphere radiating from Meiling Wei. She stood on the edge of her manicured lawn, a vision of porcelain perfection draped in a $3,000 silk gown that shimmered like oil on water. Her eyes, sharp and cold as diamonds, were fixed on the woman standing 3 feet away. Sarah, dressed in a faded navy blue uniform that had seen better days, tried to keep her hands from trembling as she adjusted her grip on 3-year-old Toby. The boy was agitated, his small fingers twisting the fabric of Sarah's collar, his eyes darting toward the crowd of elite investors mingling near the infinity pool. Meiling's voice sliced through the ambient sound of clinking champagne flutes and soft jazz. It wasn't a shout, but a low, venomous hiss that carried further than any scream. She pointed a manicured finger at the corner of a vintage, hand-woven silk rug that had been brought out for the garden party. There was a faint, damp smudge on the ivory fabric where Sarah had stepped just seconds ago while lunging to catch Toby from a dangerous stumble near the marble stairs. "You have to be kidding me," Meiling sneered, her lip curling in a way that made her look more like a predator than a socialite. "Do you have any idea what that rug costs? More than you make in 3 years, Sarah. Or can you even count that high?" She turned to the group of wealthy investors who had paused their conversations to watch the spectacle. "Look at this. I hire these people out of some misplaced sense of charity, and this is how they repay me. By dragging the dirt from their pathetic lives onto my property." Sarah felt the heat of 100 judgmental gazes. She lowered her head, not out of shame for her work, but to hide the flash of recognition in her eyes as she watched Toby's hands begin to shake. He was overstimulated, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. "Mrs. Wei, I am so sorry," but Toby was about to fall. "He's very sensitive to the noise today, and I needed to reach him before." Meiling didn't let her finish. She stepped forward, the scent of her cloying, expensive perfume hitting Sarah like a physical blow. "Don't you dare use my son as an excuse for your incompetence. You are a servant. You are here to be invisible and efficient, neither of which you seem capable of. You think because you have white skin you can just walk wherever you want in this house? You think you're a guest? You're a domestic, Sarah. A cheap, replaceable domestic from the suburbs. Know your place." The silence that followed was heavy. One of the guests, an entitled woman named Karen from the estate next door, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "It's the entitlement for me, Meiling. They really think they own the place just because they hold the baby." Meiling took a slow, deliberate sip from her crystal glass, her eyes never leaving Sarah's. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she tilted the glass. A stream of vintage champagne cascaded down, soaking into Sarah's scuffed orthopedic shoes and the hem of her trousers. The guests gasped, some with mock horror, others with sadistic delight. "Oops," Meiling whispered, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. "Now you have a reason to get on your knees. Clean it, take off that ugly sweater and scrub the rug. Right now. If I see even a shadow of a stain left, you won't just be fired. I'll make sure you never work in this zip code again." Sarah looked down at her soaked feet, then up at Meiling. For a fleeting second, the timid Nanny vanished, replaced by a woman whose gaze held a terrifying amount of weight. But then, Toby let out a soft, whimpering cry, and Sarah's focus shifted back to the child. She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She slowly knelt on the hard marble, the champagne-soaked fabric of her uniform clinging to her skin, and began to wipe the floor. She could hear the snickers and the clicking of phone cameras above her, but her heart was hammering for a different reason. As she scrubbed, she noticed the way Toby's eyes were rolling back slightly, a neurological red flag she knew all too well from a life she had tried to leave behind. The storm was here, and the woman screaming at her had no idea that the trash she was humiliating was the only person in the world who knew how to save her son. The fluorescent lights of the hospital laboratory hummed with a sterile, rhythmic energy that Sarah once found comforting. 25 years ago, she didn't wear a faded navy uniform. She wore a crisp, white doctor's coat with Dr. Sarah Huntington, Chief of Pediatric Neurology, embroidered in silver silk over her heart. She stood at a mahogany podium, the flashbulbs of cameras dancing in her eyes as she accepted the National Medical Excellence Award. The applause was deafening, a sea of distinguished colleagues rising to their feet to honor the woman who had cracked the code on early-onset neurological tremors in toddlers. She had been the gold standard, the visionary, the woman who had it all, a brilliant career and a family that waited for her in a home filled with laughter and the scent of vanilla candles. But the memory shifted, turning cold and gray like a winter fog. The applause faded into the screech of tires on wet asphalt and the shattering of glass that sounded like 1,000 dying bells. She could still smell the acrid scent of burning rubber and the metallic tang of blood. In one night, the world had been hollowed out. Her husband and her beautiful 7-year-old daughter were gone, leaving behind only an echoing silence and a mountain of medical bills from the desperate, frantic weeks Sarah had spent trying to use her own expertise to save her child. She had sat by her daughter's hospital bed, counting the remaining coins in her purse for the vending machine, watching the monitors flatline despite every ounce of her world-class knowledge. The shame of her own helplessness had been a physical weight, a crushing pressure that eventually drove her to strip off the white coat for good. She couldn't be a doctor anymore. She couldn't look at a sterile hallway without seeing the ghosts of the people she loved. She chose a life of quiet service instead, hoping that by caring for other people's children as a simple nanny, she might finally find a way to quiet the screaming grief in her soul. In a different corner of the world, a younger Meiling was living a very different kind of nightmare. She wasn't surrounded by silk or marble. She was standing in the mud of a rural village, her fingers raw from scrubbing laundry for the local wealthy families. She watched the way the rich women looked over her head as if she were a piece of furniture, and she had made a silent, desperate vow. She would never be looked down upon again. She didn't want respect, she wanted power. She wanted to be the one holding the glass of champagne, not the one cleaning it up. Her cruelty in the present was merely a shield, a jagged armor she had built to hide the terrified, poor girl who still lived inside her. She hated Sarah not because of her skin or her job, but because Sarah possessed a quiet, unshakable dignity that Meiling had never been able to buy with all the money in the world. Back in the present, the cold liquid of the champagne seeped through Sarah's socks, pulling her back from the haze of the past. The humiliation in the garden was sharp, but the medical professional inside her was screaming louder than Meiling ever could. As she knelt on the marble, Sarah's eyes tracked the subtle, rhythmic twitching of little Toby's left hand. She saw the way his pupils failed to constrict in the bright California sun. It was a specific, rare pattern of neurological distress, the very same one she had spent a decade researching before her life fell apart. The hidden truth was vibrating beneath her skin. Sarah wasn't just a servant being bullied by a socialite, she was a world-class specialist watching a catastrophe unfold in the arms of a woman too blinded by vanity to see her own son's silent plea for help. The tension in the air was no longer just about a stained rug, it was about the ticking clock of a child's life and the secret history of the woman currently being told to know her place. The following morning, the atmosphere in the Wei mansion was thick with a tension that felt like static electricity before a lightning strike. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing through the neurological markers she had seen in Toby the day before. As she stood in the kitchen, carefully preparing a specific, low-sugar breakfast for the boy to help stabilize his sensory spikes, the clicking of high heels on the marble floor signaled the arrival of the storm. Meiling walked in, flanked by her neighbor Karen Miller. Both women were dressed for a mid-morning Pilates session in designer spandex that cost more than Sarah's car, their faces tight with a mixture of boredom and malice. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Wei, I've been observing Toby's motor responses and his recent sensitivity to light. I really think we should consider a specialized neurological consultation. His tremors are..." Meiling didn't even let the sentence finish. She let out a sharp, jagged laugh that sounded like glass breaking in a blender. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, turning to Karen with a theatrical roll of her eyes. "Did the lady who scrubs my floors suddenly get a medical degree when I wasn't looking? This is exactly what I was telling you, Karen. Give these people an inch of kindness, and they think they're part of the family. They start diagnosing things to make themselves feel important. Or maybe you're just trying to set the stage for a lawsuit, Sarah. Is that it? Are you trying to extort me by claiming my son is sick?" Karen leaned against the kitchen island, tapping a French manicured nail against her chin. "Honestly, Meiling, it's a classic move. They create a problem, act like the hero, and then demand a raise. It's actually kind of disgusting how they use children to get ahead. You need to be careful. People like this are mentally unstable. The air in the room felt thin. Sarah stood her ground, her voice dropping an octave, losing its soft, nanny-like edge. Mrs. Wei, this isn't about money. Toby is showing signs of early-stage sensory processing dysfunction. If you don't address it now, the seizures could. That is enough. Meiling screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. You are a domestic. You are paid to change diapers and keep your mouth shut. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea how many specialists I have on speed dial who are actual professionals? I don't need a middle-aged failure telling me how to raise my son. Meiling grabbed her phone and began typing furiously. I'm calling the agency. No, better yet, I'm calling every mother in the neighborhood. I'm going to make sure no one ever lets you near a child again. You're dangerous. You're delusional. Just then, Mr. Chen, the quiet assistant to Meiling's husband, walked into the room to deliver some documents. He caught Sarah's eye for a split second, seeing the quiet, desperate dignity in her gaze. He had seen Sarah's care for Toby, the way she stayed up late reading to him when Meiling was out at galas, but he quickly looked down at his feet, his shoulders hunched in cowardice. He couldn't risk his salary to defend a nanny. Sarah was utterly alone. The breaking point came an hour later. Sarah had taken Toby to the nursery to shield him from the shouting, and she was gently massaging the base of his skull, a technique used to calm the vagus nerve and prevent a sensory meltdown. The door flew open. Meiling stood there, her phone raised as if she were filming a crime scene. What are you doing to him? Meiling shrieked, her face contorting with a terrifying, artificial rage. Get your hands off my son. You're hurting him. I knew it. I knew you were trying to hurt him so you could blame me. Sarah stood up, her hands raised in a calming gesture. Mrs. Wei, please, he's having a meltdown. I'm just trying to soothe his. Meiling didn't listen. She turned to the hallway and screamed for the security guard at the gate. Call the police. Right now. This woman is abusing my child. She's attacking him. Within minutes, the quiet, upscale street was filled with the flashing red and blue lights of a patrol car. The neighbors, led by Karen, spilled out onto their balconies, phones held high to record the white nanny being escorted out in handcuffs. Meiling stood on her front steps, dabbing at fake tears for the cameras, playing the role of the victimized mother perfectly. As the officer pushed Sarah into the back of the cruiser, Sarah didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the angry crowd. She looked at the nursery window, where Toby was pressed against the glass, silent and trembling, watching his only source of safety be driven away. The humiliation was complete, the isolation total, but as the car pulled away, Sarah's expression changed from fear to a cold, hard resolve. They had taken her dignity, her job, and her reputation. But they had left a world-class neurologist with nothing left to lose, and that was their biggest mistake. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs unlocking was the only sound in the dim precinct interview room. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the scratched wooden table, the blue uniform now wrinkled and stained with dried champagne. Across from her sat a man in a charcoal suit that cost more than Meiling's entire garden party. He didn't look like a public defender, he looked like a shark in silk. He slid a single manila folder across the table toward her. Everything is ready, Dr. Huntington, the lawyer whispered, his voice smooth and devoid of the judgment Sarah had faced all morning. The charges have been dropped. The precinct captain realized who you were the moment your fingerprint scan hit the federal database. He's currently outside sweating through his shirt, wondering if you're going to sue the city for wrongful arrest. Sarah didn't look at the folder. She looked at the small, barred window high up on the wall. For months, she had lived as a shadow, a woman seeking penance for a past she couldn't change, letting herself be treated like garbage because she felt she deserved it. But the image of Toby's face against that nursery window had changed everything. The victim she had played for 25 years was gone. In her place was the planner. I don't want to sue the city, Robert, Sarah said, and her voice was no longer the soft, hesitant whisper of a nanny. It was a cold, surgical blade of a voice. the voice of a woman who once commanded boardrooms and surgical theaters. I want the acquisition papers for Wei International. Every debt they owe, every mortgage Meiling's husband has taken out to fund that mansion, and every share of their primary medical subsidiary. The lawyer nodded, a slow, predatory smile forming on his lips. Your silent stake in Aegis Medical already gives you a 60% majority over their holdings. If you pull the merger today, Zhang Wei goes bankrupt by Friday. If you go through with the hostile takeover, you don't just ruin them, bureaucratically speaking, you own them. Sarah stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in her faded uniform. For the first time since the accident, her eyes weren't filled with grief, they were filled with a terrifyingly clear purpose. Meiling wanted to treat me like I was invisible, she murmured, more to herself than to the lawyer. She wanted to throw me out like I was trash. Well, she's about to find out what happens when you throw away the only thing holding your world together. She walked out of the precinct, ignoring the stammering apologies of the police captain. She stepped into the back of a waiting black sedan, the leather interior smelling of cedar and old money. She took out her burner phone and saw a notification from a hidden camera app, a feed Mr. Chen had secretly granted her access to. On the screen, she saw Meiling laughing on her balcony, clinking glasses with Karen, celebrating their victory over the help. Sarah didn't feel anger. She felt the cold, methodical focus of a surgeon about to excise a tumor. She leaned back into the plush seat and dialed a number she hadn't called in decades. This is Dr. Huntington, she said into the receiver. I'm ready to sign the papers for the Aegis Wei merger. But I want the signing ceremony to be public. I want every camera, every investor, and every neighbor in that Hills district present. I'm coming home, Robert. And tell my styling team I need something that says, CEO, not, domestic. As the car pulled away from the curb, Sarah looked at her calloused hands. She had spent months scrubbing floors, but the dirt Meiling had tried to throw on her wouldn't stick. The tables weren't just turning, she was about to flip the entire room. Meiling thought she had won because she removed the trash, but she had actually just handed the keys of her kingdom to the woman she despised most. Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the grand gala ahead. The game was no longer about survival. It was about justice, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah Huntington was playing to win. The following week was a study in calculated silence. To the world of the Hollywood Hills, Sarah Huntington had vanished into the gutter where they believed she belonged. Meiling Wei spent her afternoons lounging by the pool, the scent of expensive coconut tanning oil masking the stench of her own arrogance. She sat with Karen Miller, the two of them scrolling through their social media feeds, laughing at the grainy footage of Sarah being led away in handcuffs. Honestly, the neighborhood feels cleaner already, Meiling remarked, snapping her fingers at a new, terrified maid to bring her another iced matcha. It's like taking out the trash. You don't realize how much it stinks until it's finally gone. Meiling was already planning her victory outfit for the grand gala, convinced that her husband's company was days away from a merger that would cement their status as the undisputed royalty of the Hills. While Meiling celebrated a hollow victory, Sarah was living in a world of steel and glass. She had moved into a high-security suite at the Aegis Medical headquarters downtown, a far cry from the cramped, dusty apartment she had occupied as a nanny. The faded blue uniform was gone, replaced by silk blouses and tailored trousers that moved with a quiet, authoritative rustle. Her days began at 4 in the morning, fueled by black coffee and the relentless drive for justice. She sat at the head of a massive mahogany conference table, her eyes scanning complex financial spreadsheets and neurological reports. Every phone call she made was a chess move. I want the audit on Wei International finished by tonight, she told her legal team, her voice steady and cold. If Zhang Wei so much as bought a cup of coffee using company funds, I want to know about it. Sarah's preparation wasn't just about financial destruction, it was about the boy Meiling had discarded in her pursuit of perfection. Late at night, Sarah sat with Mr. Chen in secret, encrypted video meetings. Chen, finally finding a spine in the face of Sarah's quiet power, had become her eyes and ears inside the mansion. He sent her hidden recordings of Toby's deteriorating condition, the way the boy stared blankly at walls while his mother shouted into her phone in the next room. Sarah felt a familiar, sharp pang in her chest, the same one she felt 25 years ago, but this time it didn't paralyze her. It sharpened her focus. She wasn't just setting a trap for a bully, she was building a fortress for a child who had no one else. The grind was grueling and invisible. Sarah spent hours with pediatric specialists, the very peers who used to call her a genius, coordinating a care plan for Toby that would begin the moment the gavel fell. She was a ghost in the machine, systematically dismantling the Wei family's leverage while Meiling spent thousands on a gown for her own social execution. On the final night before the gala, Sarah stood on the balcony of her suite, looking out over the city lights. She held a small, leather-bound folder containing the finalized hostile takeover documents. To Meiling, Sarah was still the white trash nanny who had ruined a silk rug. Meiling had no idea that while she was busy mocking the help had bought the house, the company, and the very ground she was standing on. The trap was set, the bait was the merger, and tomorrow, the world would see exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who has already lost everything and found her way back. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a shimmering cavern of excess, illuminated by 1,000 crystal chandeliers that cast a sharp, unforgiving light on the city's elite. The air was a suffocating blend of expensive floral arrangements and $500 an ounce perfumes. Meiling Wei moved through the crowd like she owned the very oxygen everyone was breathing. She was draped in a custom emerald silk gown, her neck adorned with a diamond serpent that seemed to pulse with every arrogant tilt of her head. Beside her, Karen Miller was already 3 glasses of champagne deep, her laughter shrill and frequent. "I'm telling you, Meiling, this is your night," Karen gushed, scanning the room for anyone important enough to acknowledge. "The merger with Aegis is going to put you on the cover of every business magazine in the country. And to think, just a week ago you were dealing with that disgusting nanny situation. Speaking of which, is that... No, it can't be." Meiling followed Karen's horrified gaze toward the grand entrance. Her wine-dark lips curled into a sneer of pure disbelief. Standing near the velvet ropes was Sarah. She looked ridiculous. She was wearing the same drab, oversized trench coat she had worn the day she was arrested, her hair pulled back in a severe, tired bun. To the socialites in the room, she looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. "Security," Meiling barked, snapping her fingers so loudly it caused a nearby waiter to flinch. She marched toward the entrance, her heels clicking like gunfire against the polished marble. The crowd parted as she approached Sarah, her face contorting into a mask of theatrical outrage. "I thought I made myself clear, Sarah. I told you if you ever showed your face in this zip code again, I'd have you back in a cell before you could blink. What are you doing here? Did you come to beg for your final paycheck? Or did you just want to see what real success looks like before you head back to the shelter?" Sarah stood perfectly still. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look angry. She looked at Meiling with a strange, haunting pity that only made Meiling's blood boil hotter. "I'm here for the signing, Meiling," Sarah said quietly. Meiling let out a laugh that was more of a shriek. "The signing? You? Do you hear this, everyone? The domestic wants to watch the grown-ups sign the multi-billion-dollar merger. Maybe she thinks if she sticks around, someone will tip her a 20 for cleaning up the hors d'oeuvres. Get her out of here. She's trespassing and she's depressing the guests." The head of security stepped forward, reaching for Sarah's arm, but he stopped when a tall, sharp-featured man in a black tuxedo stepped between them. It was Mr. Robert, the lawyer from the precinct. He didn't say a word to the guard. He simply held up a gold-embossed VIP credential that signaled absolute authority. Meiling's husband, Zhang Wei, rushed over, his forehead beaded with sweat. He looked like a man who was watching his house burn down. "Meiling, shut up," he hissed, grabbing his wife's arm. "The investors are watching. The CEO of Aegis is supposed to be here any minute. We can deal with the help later." "I will not shut up," Meiling snapped, wrenching her arm away. "This woman insulted our family. She tried to harm our son. She belongs in the gutter, not at our gala." She looked back at Sarah, leaning in close so only she could smell the venom on her breath. "Look at you. You're nothing. You're a footnote in my life. By tomorrow, you'll be a forgotten ghost, and I'll be the most powerful woman in this city. Now, get out before I have the police drag you out again." Sarah didn't move. She glanced at her watch, a plain, stainless steel piece that contrasted sharply with the gold Rolexes in the room. "It's time," she said softly. The ballroom lights suddenly dimmed, and a spotlight swung toward the center stage where a massive digital screen displayed the logos of Wei International and Aegis Medical. The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, his voice booming through the silent room. "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we have all been waiting for. Please welcome the majority shareholder and chief executive officer of Aegis Medical to finalize the merger." Meiling smoothed her dress, a triumphant, predatory smile fixed on her face as she prepared to walk toward the stage to stand beside her husband. She looked at Sarah one last time, whispering, "Watch and learn, you pathetic loser." But as the MC began to speak again, the name he uttered didn't belong to any man Meiling knew. "Please welcome," the MC shouted, "Dr. Sarah Huntington." The room froze. Meiling's smile didn't just fade, it disintegrated. She watched in paralyzing horror as Sarah reached up, unbuttoned the drab trench coat, and let it fall to the floor like a shedskin. Underneath, Sarah was wearing a breathtaking, charcoal gray power suit that fit her with surgical precision. She stepped out of the coat, leaving it in a heap on the floor, the last remnant of the woman Meiling thought she could crush. As Sarah began to walk toward the stage, her heels clicking with the steady, rhythmic beat of a ticking time bomb, the only sound in the ballroom was the collective gasp of 100 people realizing they had just witnessed the greatest mistake of Meiling Wei's life. The silence in the ballroom was so heavy it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Sarah Huntington ascended the stairs to the stage with a calm, predatory grace, her heels echoing like a heartbeat against the wood. Meiling stood frozen at the foot of the stage, her jaw hanging open, her expensive emerald dress suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The diamond serpent around her neck seemed to choke her as she watched the domestic she had shamed move toward the microphone. Behind Sarah, the giant screen flickered, but instead of the merger agreement everyone expected, a grainy, high-definition video began to play. It was the footage from the mansion, Meiling screaming at Toby, Meiling pouring champagne on Sarah's feet, and Meiling's face contorted in a mask of pure, ugly hatred. Sarah reached the podium and adjusted the mic. Her voice didn't shake, it boomed through the speakers with the authority of a woman who had reclaimed her kingdom. "A week ago, Meiling Wei stood in her garden and told me to know my place," Sarah said, her eyes locking onto Meiling's trembling form. "She called me trash. She called me a servant. She even had me arrested for the crime of trying to save her son's life." Sarah paused, letting the weight of the words settle on the stunned crowd. "The truth is, I've spent 25 years hiding from the world because I thought I had failed as a doctor. But Meiling reminded me of something very important. She reminded me that there are people in this world who think their bank accounts give them the right to extinguish the dignity of others." Meiling finally found her voice, though it was thin and cracking. "This is a lie," she shrieked, looking around at the guests who were now backing away from her as if she were contagious. "You're a fraud. Zhang, do something. This is our night." But Zhang Wei was staring at his shoes, his face a ghostly shade of gray. He knew the numbers. He knew that with one word from the woman on that stage, his entire empire would vanish into the ether. Sarah didn't even look at the video. She looked at the legal documents sitting on the glass table. "I was supposed to sign a merger tonight that would have saved Wei International from bankruptcy," Sarah continued, her tone dropping to a cold, surgical chill. "But as the majority shareholder of Aegis Medical, I've decided to move in a different direction. I don't do business with people who value silk rugs more than human beings. And I certainly don't do business with mothers who treat their children like accessories while they ignore their medical needs." Sarah picked up a fountain pen, but instead of signing the merger, she held up a different set of papers, the hostile takeover and the emergency protective order for Toby. The crowd erupted into a low roar of whispers. Meiling lunged toward the stage, her face twisted in a desperate, ugly snarl. "You can't do this. Do you know who I am? I am Meiling Wei. You're just a nanny. You're nothing." Sarah leaned into the microphone, her expression as hard as granite. No, Meiling. I was your nanny. But as of 5 minutes ago, I am your landlord, I am your boss, and based on the medical evidence I've submitted to the court, I am the person who is taking Toby away from that toxic house tonight. The double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a social worker. They weren't there for Sarah this time. They walked straight toward Meiling. The color drained completely from Meiling's face as she realized the cameras she had loved so much were now capturing her ultimate disgrace. The killing blow wasn't the money or the company, it was the look of absolute, soul-crushing defeat as the handcuffs clicked shut around Meiling's wrists in the middle of her own gala. Sarah stood tall on the stage, the light of the chandeliers finally reflecting off a woman who was no longer a ghost. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered with the precision of a surgeon's blade. The fall of Meiling Wei was as swift as it was public. By the time the sun rose over the Hollywood Hills the next morning, the viral videos of her arrest had stripped her of every social invitation and luxury sponsorship she had spent decades cultivating. Zhang Wei filed for divorce within 48 hours, his lawyers moving with a ruthless efficiency to distance him from the woman who had tanked his company's value in a single evening. Without the Wei fortune to shield her, Meiling found herself in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. A place that smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap carpet, the very environment she had once mocked with such vitriol. She spent her days scrolling through photos of galas she was no longer invited to, her manicured nails chipped and her designer wardrobe gathering dust in a closet that was smaller than her former pantry. The Queen of the Hills was gone, replaced by a woman whose name had become a cautionary tale for the elite. Sarah Huntington, however, chose a different path than the one of bitter revenge. She didn't spend her time gloating over Meiling's bankruptcy. Instead, she used her reclaimed wealth and her restored medical license to transform the very mansion she had once scrubbed. The cold marble floors were covered with soft, sensory-friendly mats, and the harsh glass walls were replaced with warm wood and vibrant, healing gardens. She opened the Huntington Center for Neurodiversity, a state-of-the-art clinic where the cost of care was based on what a family could afford, not the size of their portfolio. She stood in the center of the lobby, no longer a shadow in a faded blue uniform, but a beacon of hope for parents who had been told their children were difficult or broken. 5 years later, the California sun bathed the Huntington Center in a golden, peaceful light. A young boy with bright, observant eyes ran across the grass, his laughter ringing out like music. It was Toby. He wasn't the shaking, silent child from the mansion anymore. Thanks to Sarah's unwavering care and neurological expertise, he had found his voice. He ran toward Sarah, who was sitting on a stone bench, and presented her with a dandelion he had picked. "Look, Sarah, I found a star," he said, his speech clear and confident. Sarah took the flower, her heart swelling with a fullness she hadn't felt since before the accident. She had lost her daughter, but in saving Toby, she had found a way to heal the world, one child at a time. As Sarah watched Toby play, she noticed a woman standing at the edge of the property, peering through the iron gates. It was Meiling. She looked decades older, her face etched with the lines of regret and a life spent in the shadows. She was wearing a simple, mass-market coat and scuffed shoes, the very rags she had once used to identify the people she considered trash. She watched her son from a distance, her eyes welling with tears as she realized the boy was thriving in a way he never could have under her vanity. Sarah stood up and walked toward the gate. She didn't call the police. She didn't yell. She simply opened the gate and handed Meiling a brochure for the center's family counseling program. "It's never too late to learn how to be a human being, Meiling," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with a firm but quiet grace. "But you have to start by looking at people, not their labels." Meiling took the paper with trembling hands, her head bowed in a genuine shame that no camera could capture. As Sarah walked back toward Toby, she realized that the greatest justice wasn't the bank accounts she had emptied or the mansion she had seized. It was the legacy of kindness she was building. The world will often tell you that your value is determined by the brand on your clothes, the title on your business card, or the zero in your bank balance. They will tell you to judge a book by its cover and a person by their uniform. But the truth is much simpler and far more powerful. Real power isn't found in how many people you can look down upon. It's found in how many people you are willing to lift up. Because in the end, we aren't remembered for the rugs we protected, but for the hearts we reached. Kindness is the only currency that never devalues, and karma is the only debt that always gets paid in full.